So we're in the summer of 2017.
Yes.
The president is waffling on DACA. You recognize that. He's talking in press conferences about feeling for the kids. He knows kids. He's got kids himself. You're concerned. You call Chris Kobach, and you guys have a plan. Can you tell me about what you
I don't know if I would call it waffling. Look, the president, if you go back and look at President Trump, candidate Trump, citizen Trump, he's always, and he looks at this, I think, holistically, right? Not just from a policy perspective. And this has followed him from the time he was a private citizen. So he is on anything on immigration, on the wall, on asylum, on, gaming the system. He's always had, a more holistic, I think, idea or concept than someone I would say would or said to be the immigration hardliners, or people that think that we have to, control our sovereignty and also protect our low-skilled workers, particularly Hispanic and African American. What Kobach, because Chris is, I think, considered the top lawyer in the immigration debate on our side of the football. And so it was decided that he was going to talk to certain attorney generals in the spring of 17 about bringing a suit, particularly Louisiana and maybe Texas teaming together. So you go to the Fifth Circuit and actually bring something up on DACA and get it into the court system to ultimately prove that it's obviously unconstitutional. What happened is, I think the Texas Attorney General wrote a letter to Jeff Sessions and said, this is essentially what we're going to do. Sessions, and when you say waffling, the president, and a lot of times he's thinking through his policy and getting feedback. Remember, he is a marketer, and he's trying to figure out, in his mind, what is the right way to go. And like I said, if you talk to Stephen Miller or Jeff Sessions or myself, people that have been with the president, for even before the campaign, but have been people that talked to him about immigration for years, Lou Dobbs, you would see that this is one that, I'm not saying he's ambivalent, but he's always trying to think through a more, what I would call, holistic solution than some of the immigration hardliners. And what Sessions did is then gave a pretty important speech in the fall of 2017. At the same time, all these debates were going on the budget and debt ceiling, and DACA was part of that, and said that essentially it was unconstitutional and they were going to go forward. Kelly then came out in I think 2018, early 2018, said we're going to phase it out, which was, from the hardliners' perspective, not what we wanted. We wanted to be more aggressive than that. Certain progressive, liberal, left-wing groups then went to court. It's in the court system today. And so DACA is one that I think is emblematic, quite frankly, about a lot of the ambivalence throughout the entire country on certain issues of immigration.
Did they help? Did that suit help pressure things?
Not pressure. I think what it was is it brought in high relief. People have argued for a long time that what President Obama did was unconstitutional, and that this should be taken care of and then deal with the situation once you prove it's unconstitutional. I think what Kobach and the attorney generals wanted to do was to get this up at the right level, and let's get on with it. Let's quit having all this kind of disparate movements. And I think that's why the Texas AG took the lead, wrote a very powerful letter, really put the attorney general on notice. Jeff Sessions, obviously being a hardliner on immigration, came out with his speech, which I think was a pretty seminal speech at the time, in the fall of 2017. And I think this is one of the benefits of Trump's presidency, is that it brought, all this stuff had kind of been going in different directions, and things were never really brought to conclusion, or at least brought to the venue where you could determine, make some determination. And I think that was, I thought it was a big help and very early on.
So let me now jump to January 9th and January 11th. This is 18. This is the White House meeting where there's a bipartisan group that's come over from the Hill that's now meeting in the cabinet room. It's being broadcast on CNN. I'm curious to know where you are around this time, because it looks in that meeting like the president's about to agree to do a Clean Dream Act or DACA deal. Kevin McCarthy has to kind of pull him back, right?
Right.
So there's that. And then there's a day. And on the 11th, President calls Durbin and Graham from the Hill. They're on their way over to the White House because he wants to sign something. That's what he's told them. They get there, and there's a group of hardliners. Representative Goodlotte's there, Senator Cotton's there. Help me understand what's changed, what's going on in these 2 days.
Yeah. Well, once again, I think this is, it shows that how the president's trying to think through this. Remember, Durbin and Graham just don't appear in January of 18 in the Roosevelt room. They are in the spring of 17. One of the reasons that Kobach is kind of brought into the mix and we start talking to the attorney generals, there is a huge movement behind the scenes in the spring of 17 led by Durbin and Graham in certain elements, certain more progressive elements in the White House. In fact, this is where General Kelly is essentially jumped at a hearing and said, hey, about this DACA thing, we're way down the road. And Kelly knows absolutely nothing about it. General Kelly is so upset that he's saying, hey, he informs the chief of staff, Reince Priebus, and others, right? Maybe some of the progressive elements working with Durbin and Graham, this can't happen again. If you're going to start talking about DACA, this is my purview. This is in my vertical. I got to be in the loop. So the Durbin Graham thing is from almost the beginning of the administration. You have this, and I wouldn't, kind of the moderate element of the Republican Party, the Republican establishment apparatus that is, to me, very open borders and very much almost ideologically tied to the left in a large extent to give some happy talk about border security, but they're very inclined to agree. And I think in January, you start to see this play out. Kelly gets involved, and there's going to be this decrease in DACA. That's what comes out of this. But those two elements, and here's what's interesting. You call Goodlatte and Cotton, or Goodlatte particularly, hardliners. From the hardliners' perspective, they're moderates. So, but that is the voices you're hearing. And President Trump it's a Socratic process. He's thinking this through as he goes along. Remember, on DACA particularly, where he's very hardline on the wall, he's very hardline on asylum. Many of these things like birthright citizenship today, about the ability to go on welfare immediately, public services. President Trump is extremely has his default position is tough. On DACA, it's the one that he's, I would say, ambivalent on and searching for an answer that he thinks is right, searching for a solution that fits Donald Trump. And I've always respected that. And I was very open about, hey, and I've always said, and one of the reasons I seem to take, sometimes extreme positions on issues, that's how you can get to compromise. If you take these extreme issues and positions and you identify it clearly of what it is and the trade-offs, that allows people room to actually have a discussion and a debate internally. But January 18 will go down, I think, is one that, and some of the reasons I think things have dragged on to date. I think the progressive groups went to court right after that, and we're still don't have the clarity on DACA.
But thinking back to sort of the early immigration work that you and Sessions and Miller were involved in and know so well, when you're watching the meeting on the 9th, are you worried? Are you freaking out?
No, I'm not freaking out, but it's part of the process. You just have to work the program. Somebody's got to get in there. We have to get Stephen. These things are going to happen. They happen on other issues too. It happens on national security when people wanting to take kinetic military action and other people who are more inclined to do economic warfare. This is the way, here's the thing about Trump. And this is why I think he is a stabilizing force. He looks at all options and he's going to take the option he thinks is best and one of the ones that's maybe argued the best and has the most backup to it. And in DACA, yeah, am I concerned? You're always concerned, particularly when you hear that, hey, I want to sign something, guys are coming up because I want to sign something. So yeah, you've got to be concerned. But at that time, particularly with Stephen in the White House and Sessions was still, and even Kelly, who was never a DACA hardliner, just knowing you had reasonable voices around, I knew it would settle out.
Let me ask you about zero tolerance. So we jump now to May. The significance of the announcement to you, to Miller, to Sessions, the message that it's sending to the base. But then also I'm interested in when the president does back off of it. What are you thinking? What are you watching and seeing?
One of my concerns with this is that I think zero tolerance is the most humane, because I think it stops, and you're trying to stop the cartels from this human trafficking. You should be all over, safe third-party country. You should be all over, trying to stop the trafficking, human trafficking. The zero tolerance to me is the policy to do it. What I'm concerned about is this takes a major messaging operation. You have to explain. The American people are kind of detached on the details of what's happening on the southern border. They're particularly detached, I think, about the reality of what's happening in Central America. They're detached about, this cauldron, right, that's on the southern border, particularly how it's been not just militarized by, particularly in northern Mexico, in the cartel wars of the Mexican authorities against the cartels, but how the cartels are winning. In many regards, northern Mexico and even some of the southern United States along the border, as people down there will tell you, are like Afghanistan to a degree, that it's an actual war going on and an insurgency. And so my concern at the time is that, not just people hadn't thought 3 moves down, but maybe the messaging is not well enough, and the battlefield is not prepared enough it just kind of dropped. And understanding President Trump is always going to respond to what he sees in the media, and what he's a marketing guy. He's gonna respond. And if this thing's not messaged properly, and people don't understand what you're trying to accomplish, then I think you can have some blowback. And in fact, that's what happened. And I think this goes to the fact of not just the White House Communications Department, but also Stephen, Attorney General Sessions, and a broader group, that you really have to think 3 or 4 moves down in order to serve the American people, and to make sure that you're doing that, you're doing the right thing for this biblical tragedy that's coming up from Central America and now on the southern border of the United States.
But ultimately, the president feels like the rollout and the public sort of criticism it's messy, it's fierce, it's pretty aggressive, and he has to withdraw. What are you feeling at that point?
That look, it's ultimately the right policy, that you're going to have to do something, and the something is now, I think, going to galvanize what the real issues are. One, it's the Mexican government. Think about where we've come in that time frame since the president did back off. You now have a third party, I think, agreement with Guatemala, which the Northern Triangle. You have to have. You're well down the road of having one with Mexico, although you're not there. We have this thing about, they will the asylum seekers will stay in Mexico. The Stay in Mexico program that I know the courts are involved in. We'll have to see how that plays out. The Mexican government has also brought Mexican Marines up to the northern border, which has had a pretty dramatic decrease in asylum seekers. We've seen a pretty dramatic decrease given other comparable time periods here recently. So I wasn't thrilled at the time. And the reason I wasn't thrilled, I do believe that zero tolerance is the correct policy, right? You can't just have unlimited open economic migration. You have to make people go through the ports of entry. You have to stick to the political asylum system. And so I thought at the time it was mishandled, and it wasn't Trump's fault. It was the people around him who very well intentioned understood the policy, but maybe didn't understand the dynamics of what was going to happen, not just from the media, but from the execution.
Let me ask you about the midterms and the caravans that sort of are covered around this time. My understanding is that Miller is really keeping a close eye on that, giving that information to the president. Can you take us in there a little bit?
Well, the caravans started coming up from Central America, and look, I thought some of the stuff was overhyped about sources in back of this or who's in back of it. Look, what's happening in Central America, okay, with those economies in those countries, is a tragedy of biblical proportion. Nobody faults the people in Central America. I mean, it's a horrible situation, but the solution to that, just like in Europe, the solution to North Africa is not in southern Italy. The solution to the problems, the economic problems in Central America, is not on the southern border of the United States. It's not in Texas or New Mexico or Arizona or California. That we have to find a solution there. And I think the caravans obviously became, pretty dramatic, particularly some of the media coverage of it. President Trump got involved. I think the 18 midterms were totally mishandled by the Republican Party, because they did not make it a total referendum. I think we would have held the House if we had had the ground game that went out and made this a referendum on Trump's presidency. I was advocating very early on, went on Fox, went on a lot of news shows. I went around the country with a film called Trump at War to those battleground districts. We kind of knew the 25 to 30 they're going to be in play, and make the case for Trump's overall policies, not just focus on immigration, but doing on China, the economy, and immigration, particularly is what he's trying to accomplish. I think that part of the caravan, I think got over dramatized. And I also don't think that we did a particularly good job of empathy with the people coming up. Look, I'm as hard line on immigration as you can possibly get. And that is to protect the sovereignty of this country, to have the rule of law, and particularly to protect, because I'm a populist, protect working class Hispanic and African American people in these border communities and low skilled workers. The solution can't be on their backs, and that's where it's always going to be unless we solve this. And so I think that there are solutions to solve it. The first, I think, is breaking the cartels. That's where you have to have a zero tolerance policy. But I do think that it got into too much, and what we can't do is demonize the people themselves, right? They're in horrible situations in these countries. We understand that, but we can't get into the business of economic migrants. And that's why we have to have more engagement, I think, in Central America to help sort this thing out. And the solution for these problems, to me, is on the southern border of Mexico and in the triangle countries of Central America.
Let me ask you a little bit about this. We jumped over it, but you leave at a certain point, and I wonder about that mission on immigration. Does that go with you? Does that, do you find that there's more you can do outside?
As President Trump says, I'm his top student. So these are core issues with Trump from the beginning. This is why he ran for president. People forget. Look, this guy's 70 years old. He's a multi-billionaire. He's got a great family. He's buying championship golf courses in throughout the world. I mean, this is not just a life well lived. This is the way that you live your best life at the end of your career. Him to step into this cauldron and literally have his face ripped off every day, right? Is that he felt it was a call and a duty. A big part of that is this whole situation with mass illegal immigration. It was one of the cornerstones of the campaign. The entire immigration, both the mass illegal and also the legal immigration issues. And so, no, this was core. I do think when I left and I went on the outside, because I thought I had more, I took 1 year of my life from basically August 14th to go on the campaign to August 14th in the administration. I'm not a staff guy. And I felt I'd have a lot more impact. And I think I've had more impact. I mean, one of the things we're doing is we have this group that's actually building a physical wall on the southern border. Now we're augmenting President Trump's program. He and the Army Corps of Engineers are building big swaths of wall, which you need, but there's those niches in the mountains, in the deserts that the Army Corps either can't get to or they bypassed that you need to have built. And so I feel like I've been more active on the immigration issue on the outside. Now, I do admit you probably lost a little bit of the sting that I can bring to conversations, maybe some of the debates that happen internally.
But you got somebody that's still there. I mean, Stephen is, and
and Jeff Sessions was for a long time. Remember, all the problems that President Trump had, he and Sessions had over collusion and that part of the Justice Department. If you look at somebody that is actually implementing the Trump program, Stephen Miller's internal working group, which really got under the hood inside the federal government in the apparatus. And that's why Stephen has kind of retreated from the public eye, because he's actually running something that's quite significant about actually getting stuff done. Jeff Sessions did the same thing. I mean, as far as the Trump agenda on immigration, he would have never had a better attorney general than he had with Jeff Sessions. I mean, those two, from the dinner we had, those two who stayed behind, at least for a while, really started to execute on the president's plan. And that's why I think we've made such tremendous strides. I mean, we've made huge strides on this whole immigration issue in the last couple of years, a lot of it unheralded. And that is because of Stephen Miller, Jeff Sessions, and the people at the working level that have made this work.
Yeah, I mean, the legacy that Sessions leaves at Justice, for instance, I mean, the amount of work that he was doing there from day one, it's extraordinary.
Yes, I think you would say that immigration was the central organizing factor in the Justice Department to bring everything together to actually help execute on the president's plan. I think it's been extraordinary. And
help me a little bit on that detail on what Stephen Miller is doing now with sort of stepping out of the public eye. I mean, we've tried to get to him for a few interviews for this project and it hasn't happened. But what is the mission? I mean, he still represents what you guys set out to do.
I think he's accomplishing that. I think if you see what's happening, all the work that's being done. And now you see it every now and again pop up into the public sphere. All of that work is coming out of the Stephen Miller working group. I mean, Stephen is a very detailed policy guy. We got him on the campaign as a speechwriter. Speechwriter is like his third hat. He was a policy guy, and so and immigration policy has been his thing for many, many, many years. So it's he, at Capitol Hill. So even before he worked for Sessions. So he's, and I think this working group he has been very effective. It's been methodical, and it's also been below the radar, which I think has also been very helpful.
Help me understand what you guys have accomplished at this point.
Well, I think if you start, look, first off, we've brought border security now up to the forefront, and he's building the wall. There'll be 500 miles of replacement wall alone. And remember, replacement wall, they mock Trump all the time. Oh, you just replace it. Remember, the wall that's originally there, the Normandy barriers and others, were in the high volume areas that coming across. So it's very important to do the replacement wall. And I think they're actually quite smart at doing that. Then he's got all this new wall. I mean, in Trump's administration, you're going to have a lot of the wall built, plus you have enhanced awareness by Border Patrol of border security. Also with ICE, you really have had a real execution on the issue of internal enforcement. And I realize that's been controversial. Of course, Democrats want to do away with ICE. They want to do away with Border Patrol, but he's done an effective job. I don't think they've quite gotten to the employers, as they should. But I think they've done a very effective job. I think he's also started to bring up the whole this controversy over economic asylum, which really was not addressed in the Obama administration. Remember, they say kids in cages and all that. That all started during Obama. In 2014, it was Breitbart, because Border Patrol came to us with the photographs. It was Breitbart that broke all of those stories about kids in cages with the Obama administration. We broke it, and then CNN and Huffington Post and the BBC jumped on it right away. And so this has been going on for a while, and I think now you're seeing some resolution of this. The whole accomplishment of the safe third party, of really getting an asylum system that works, that's going to work both for asylum seekers and for the people in the United States. I believe this is why President Trump, now we got 29% of the Hispanic vote. I think President Trump, because of economic policies and his enforcement, is going to get, I believe, 40% of the Hispanic vote in 2020 because of these policies. So I think if you look at, we now have a couple of very innovative programs on legal immigration. I don't think they're hardline enough, but you're starting to see that debate and discussion with Tom Cotton and other people putting forward bills. So now you really have a policy and you have an engaged debate. And I don't mind, you have Durbin, you have people on the left, they have an opinion, and look, they have political power too. But now we're engaged in really a debate for years and years and years and years and years. We just let this drift. And you go down, and everybody that watches this show should go down to the border. They should go to El Paso. They should go to the Rio Grande Valley. They should go to some of these border towns as Americans and talk to the people in these border towns. Right. And now every town in the country is becoming a border town because of the influence of the cartels and the drugs and the human trafficking. But for many years, we let this drift. And this is what I really admire about Trump, whether it's China, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's immigration. He's not going to let these problems drift. He's a businessman. Business people are into providing solutions. He's not a politician. Politicians all talk, and they will let stuff drift. Right now, we actually are engaged as a nation, and I think in 2020, it's even going to be more of a centerpiece in the national debate, as it should be. I believe, look, we're going to win some, we're going to lose some. We lost in 18, we won in 16. That's what a democracy is about, but at least now it's a fully engaged debate about what the issues are, what the stakes are, and quite frankly, what direction we want to see the country go.
How potent of an issue is immigration as we look to 2020?
I think it's going to be like in 2013, going back to that dinner where he said, hey, trade is number 100 and immigration is number 3. 2020 is going to be shaped, I think, by two things: by China and the trade, really the economic war in China, which brings in many elements of Iran, Saudi Arabia, all of that into one, and then immigration. And it's really about globalization versus the nation state. Both of these are come down to, what is a nation? What is the sovereignty of a nation? What does it mean to be a citizen? What type of deal should you have if you are a citizen? This, to me, is going to be what the real debate is on 2020. I think it's a great debate to have. And I know people have very different opinions on this. That's what a democracy is about. And I think that Trump is the perfect candidate for us to bring this up. And I think you're going to see on the Democratic side, as they select somebody that comes through their primaries, you're going to see, I think they're going to be a little more radicalized. I think you'd already see this, but I think it's a great debate to have. And to me, those two will be the central defining elements of the 2020 campaign.
So lastly, on immigration, I mean, this film starts off with the embassy meeting. Now we're 7 years later, but at the point in which you sort of look back and you think about everything you set out to do at that meeting, everything you dreamed about doing, what did you accomplish? How do you?
If we had sat there that night, because the dinner went on for 5 hours or longer, if at that night we had said that in the fall of 19, going into 20, we would have made these two issues the centerpiece of American politics, and quite frankly, changed American politics. Remember, American politics today, what's going forward, you're either going to have populist nationalism or you're going to have populist socialism. But the populist movement, okay, which I think is great, right? Even on the left, I'd rather have a populist than these elites of either side running things, that you have populism. And at that time, it was a word nobody knew. Nationalism was like this horrible word, right? To defend the nation state. If we had said at that dinner, oh, you know what? In 7 or 8 years, this will be this will be the nomenclature people use. And actually, the trade will be number one, probably about China, and immigration number two, but both inextricably linked because they're the two sides of the same coin. That we would be having that, and that networks like PBS would be doing specials to talk about this. I would have said, well, then Jeff, you definitely got to run for president. Sessions was very wise that night. He says, I'm not the guy, but that person will come along, and these issues will be up and manifested in that. And I think we've seen that. I think we've seen that in American political history.
I think you said that figure was the imperfect instrument. Now, looking back,
he's the first look. Donald, for all the grief he gets in the media, he knows he has human failings like everybody else. A lot of that's the false bravado and the false front in the Trump. He didn't have to do this. It was a duty, I think he felt, and he did it for his country. He's a patriot. And he's not perfect. None of us are perfect. But if you look at what he's accomplished, and particularly what I'm most proud of, is the stability he's offered. Let's take about those times he goes back and forth. There's still, it's the signal and the noise. The signal's very strong that this is going to be a big issue. We're not going to back down on it. We're going to solve it, but we're going to solve it in a way, his default position, we're always going to solve it in favor of citizens. Whether those citizens are Hispanic, African-American, Muslim, we're going to solve it on the side of the citizens, okay? And that is what a nation state is, and that is what nationalism is. And so I think his default position, although I'm sure in this film you're going to see times he's do it this way and that way, if you look at that's the noise. The signal couldn't be stronger. And I think that's what we're going to come to ultimately. He shifted the Overton window, right? We are now debating all the topics on Donald Trump's turf. Okay, that in January 2013, that looked like a pipe dream. Today, that's the reality.
Immigration and the way that you guys were talking about it looked like a pipe dream. I mean, that was in the shadow of Gang of Eight. I mean, that you were having this conversation. And
if you go back and look at the autopsy report, as we now know, was completely phony. It was just the typical establishment and treat the American people like they're a bunch of morons. So you've had a massive sea change, and that is because I think people started to address the American people, and particularly working class people in the Republican Party, who were kind of sold this whole, heritage, limited government, tax cuts for the Kochs, all that. And hey, all your jobs are going overseas. Your communities are flooded with illegal aliens. Your healthcare system is being destroyed. Your education system is being destroyed. What does it mean to get your sovereignty back and put a value on you as a citizen? That discussion has come so far than all the nonsense that you look at that the establishment was planning in 2013. And I'm very proud to have been someone took a small role in actually blowing up that nonsense and defending the American people.
Why is Donald Trump what is it in Donald Trump's biography makes him the perfect political candidate for the political atmosphere in 2016?
I think we've transitioned out of traditional politicians to more people who understand media. Donald Trump is a McLuhan-esque figure. And what I mean by that is he understands what Marshall McLuhan understood, is that mass communications is so overwhelming and so inextricably linked into people's lives. If you got, multiple screens you travel with all day long, that media now absorbs your own existence in the analog world, that it is critically important to understand mass communications and understand mass media. So it's the reason he went through the 17 or 16 person field in the Republican primary, which, remember, was $1 billion and 20 years in the making to get. That's the finest field the Republican Party has ever had. And in every vertical, whether it's Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Carly Fiorina, Ben Carson, the Bushes, in that vertical, you had best of class, right? Donald Trump went through that like a scythe through grass. And part of that was his understanding of immigration in China and trade. But part of that is he just understood mass communications. And he was a figure that knew how to connect, get rid of political nomenclature, which Obama initially started to do when Obama ran as a populist, right? People forget, Obama was a fire-breathing populist when he first started running, anti-war, anti-establishment, anti-everything Hillary Clinton stood for. The two populists took her down, Barack Obama the first time and Donald Trump the second, right? Because she is the ether of the system, right? Of this kind of permanent political class globalist system. And Obama ran with that. But of course, once he got in office, I think a lot, given the financial crisis, he reverted back to a lot of the neoliberal policies. Trump was in this time and place, Trump is absolutely a perfect vehicle, a perfect instrument, a perfect candidate, and really has been a perfect president to, I think, in this age, to kind of bring up and highlight these issues and start to bring them to resolution.
He gets media. He understands social media. He's using Twitter as almost a weapon in some ways. Help us understand.
Now, he doesn't get media. He drives media, right? He would sit there. Many times you sit there and he said, look at this, hit a tweet. It'd be up on CNN and the Chiron, and then they'd all be talking about it. He knows how to drive the media, and the sophisticated media just bites on it like a dog, right? And they're chasing a tire all day long. So he knows how to drive the conversation. He knows how to force them to play on his field, right? And it happens day in and day out. That's what I mean by a McLuhan-esque figure. The people in the media don't understand this. And I realize a lot of it, you're too, every day you're working, you're up close to it. But even the theoreticians at the networks, in the beloved New York Times and Washington Post and Wall Street Journal, don't really get it, that Trump can drive the agenda because he understands modern media, and he understands what's disintermediated modern media. And that is Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and quite frankly, the impromptu 1 hour press conference, outside of Marine One on the lawn of the White House.
Yeah. I mean, the White House press briefings are a thing of the past.
Yes, I think that's traditional. They may come back at some point in time, but President Trump is his communications director. He's always really been his communications director because he knows that we would have, I don't want to say fights, but disagreements. And I tell people on mass communication side, he was always right. I was always wrong. I would think of doing one way. It turns out he understands at a very deep level. When I say McLuhan-esque, it is a high compliment. In the modern age, understanding how mass communications has seeped into every aspect of life. It's one of the reasons he's triggered so many people on the left. They can't, Trump's everywhere. They're living a Kafkaesque nightmare. That's why they were so emboldened in 2018 to really go door to door, knock on doors, because they understand what the Republican establishment still doesn't get. He is a transformative figure in a historical president. The left understands, particularly younger people on the left understands, that Donald Trump's going to be in their personal lives 10, 20, and 30 years from now. What he's doing of deconstructing the administrative state and what he's doing in the federal judiciary, Trump's going to be, and since Trump understands mass media, he's all over them. They can't get away from him. And so it's very powerful, but he definitely drives the media narrative.
Let me ask you about inauguration for a moment. This isn't usually how things go. We have done the choice.
It is Donald Trump's presidency, right? It's never, see, that's right there. You're falling into with the rise of Obama from literally nowhere to Trump in that decade. All the conventions of politics have changed, yet the institutions haven't quite got the memo yet. They still want things to go back to the way things were. So to have a guy like Trump that's immediately going to say that was the biggest crowd that ever saw an inauguration. First off, to give that speech, right, which is a fire-breathing speech that basically torches the entire city and permanent political class, and then to argue that, hey, I had the biggest crowd in history, and to make that the thing for the first day, that's new politics.
It's definitely new politics. There's also the Women's March the next day.
Yes.
There's these sort of lines that are being drawn in the sand in terms of the war with the press. There's an incredible amount of resistance.
I wouldn't say they started on Inauguration Day. It started at 2:30 a.m. on November 9th. When Donald Trump was announced as president, by AP as being the winner. I mean, the next morning, you're in Trump Tower, you look down, and there's essentially a riot in the street. I mean, people are with the pink hats, and there's some people are trying to take the conch shells and cut up their. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. And he goes by, and one time he thinks they're supporters. So there are some supporters in the crowd. Generally, that's not a supporters crowd, right? Those are people that are not happy with the outcome. And so it started immediately. The resistance, and I call it the nullification project, which was, and here's the reason, and I think the Democratic Party and the media fell into it. The Clintons having, they were looking for a landslide. Remember, the reason they didn't force a Supreme Court justice in the summer is that she wanted a more progressive pick, that Obama's had too safe a pick. They were going to totally redo the federal judiciary. They were not just looking at the curtains in the White House. They were getting ready to change the carpets, right? These people were it was such a stunning, and look, it was 79,000 votes in 5 counties. We drew an inside straight, okay? And it was all because of those issues of immigration and trade in China that got particularly Democrats, working class Democrats in those states. So the Clintons are totally in shock. And Hillary naturally has to have somebody else to blame it on. It's got to be Russia. It's got to be, all this interference. It's got to be anything, but it can't be the fault of their policies and particularly their candidate, right? And so from the beginning, the nullification project starts, and and by the time you get to Inauguration Day, it's in full bloom. The media is on board. That's why you just didn't wave a wand and have this march the next day. I think it was like 1 million. I think it was 1 million people in Washington D.C. We went to the CIA and other places during the day, and you really had to kind of map out where you're going just to get around the city.
I mean, you're in these motorcades. I mean, take us in there. I mean, what are you digging in? How is the president reacting? What are you?
Hey, we won, you lost. I'm like, let's drop the hammer. Let's roll. Come on. Look, President Trump, remember, the fight starts the very beginning. President Trump, if you look at his speech on the night he won at 2:35 or 2:45 in the morning, let's say that Brother Miller and Brother Bannon had a little different first draft of that speech, which was like, hey, guess what? We're going to Washington. We're going to burn it down. We're going to, hey, the permanent political class, we're going to hit you with a blowtorch. You just lost. The Populist Party won, and we're going to take you guys on. It was if you look at it, this is why I think it's a speech very few people go back to. I think it's one of Trump's worst speeches because he tries to bring the country, but this is what the guy's like. He's a very magnanimous person. His whole thing is to bring the country together, that this has been a very divisive campaign. And I've won a historic come from behind victory, which, remember, there were people on his campaign, right, that on Monday before the Tuesday election went around to the major networks and were walking through the math of not just how much we were going to lose by, but why we were going to lose, right? I don't want to name names, but the media knows who they are, okay? So it's, and I don't fault them. I realized, look, I was a true believer, and I thought we had a set of math that got us there. And I realized there were a lot of people that didn't. But Trump, from the beginning moment that the AP announced he's going to win, in fact, when we know internally, when the Detroit Free Press reverses their call about 11 or 12 at night that he is going to be president, he's about bringing the country together. There's certain elements of his staff, of which I proudly, take acknowledgement and said, no. Hey, we won, they lost. And we have the House and the Senate. Let's get on with it. Right. So I think it shows that Trump his natural inclination is not to be divisive. His natural inclination is to actually try to bring people together.
Let me ask you about the House for a second. Paul Ryan, somebody you had set your sights on back in that embassy meeting way back when. is now suggesting healthcare and is now saying it's time to repeal and replace. So we're in healthcare. Help me understand what you're making of it at the point when it looks like that's going to move forward.
Well, remember, we had three things. There were three things that we wanted to do right out of the box. We had America First foreign policy, right? The three legs of the stool are the American First foreign policy, the whole economics and driving, and the third element was deconstruction the administrative state. Those are the three legs of the tripod. Inside of that, you've got the three elements we're going to drive forth as the program is going to be repeal and replace Obamacare, right? That's what the Republican Party, because remember, we won in a coalition. The day I showed up to the campaign in August, I reached out to Reince Priebus and Spicer and Katie Walsh. You got to get the RNC on, Mitch McConnell. Because remember, they were going to cut Trump loose in mid-August. This guy's going to lose by 20 points. We got to save the House and hopefully win the Senate. Our whole coalition was to win as a coalition. As a coalition partner, you're going to divvy up who's going to work on what. So the three things were, number one, repeal and replace Obamacare. Number two was a massive reordering of the tax structure, a tax cut, but even more than that, really redoing the whole tax structure of the country. And the third was infrastructure, which was the one that I was most excited about because of just the way Washington works and can only focus on things. It was decided early on in the transition that repeal and replace would actually be the lead with taxes right behind it. Infrastructure would then follow because it would take us a while to get all three of these up and rolling. But the reason we went with the repeal and replace first, the Republican Party, and this shows you about the establishment Republican Party and their understanding of how to govern. Their pitch was very simple. Hey, we've passed this 50 times, right? We have a whole plan. We've worked on this forever, right? And we can just bang. You know, we get Tom Price, and Tom Price is our guy. He'll be your HHS, and he'll be the lead sled dog, and we'll just come up behind it. We'll get this done, and we'll have this up in 45 days, right? Debating, and boom, this is done. And by the Easter break, we will repeal and replace Obamacare. We won't do it in pieces. That we're going to do it all in one fell swoop. You know, it came. Look, it was some perturbations. It came. McCain's one vote. However, you could tell, and I think we could tell pretty early on that the reason the 50 bills were passed, they knew they were never going to be anywhere. So they weren't. How do I say? Totally thought through. And so you saw Ryan in this kind of, you know, situation where it's all in fits and starts. And, you know, you had the Freedom Caucus fight things, you have his own thing in the House, and you got the guys in the Senate. It's not terribly organized. That really can't be blamed on Trump. This is one of the things the coalition partner said, we got this, right? And we got this. And that was Obamacare. The second one was taxes. So
let me ask you about taxes. So, I mean, jump forward to, they're signing the tax bill, and Paul Ryan is now praising the president on the South Lawn, and there's that united government behind him. What had changed in sort of the power differential between Paul Ryan, this president?
Well, let's go back to taxes. On taxes, Paul Ryan, his whole life, Obamacare is not his deal, right? Taxes are his deal. This is why I keep teasing him. He's a guy from the Petri dish at the Heritage, right? This is a guy that thinks the budget committee is like a great way to spend your 20s, okay? The taxes were everything. In fact, when we got there, he had this whole tax plan that I kind of liked. I thought it was most economically nationalist. And, you know, he had the value-added taxes and it was incredibly complicated. But also for 7 years, they had worked on this. He had his whole thing. And I see it the first night. This is in January of 17. We fly up right after New Year's. Gary Cohn, myself, Kushner, Reince, we spend 5 hours in a dinner in the speaker's office. He walks through a very detailed thing of his tax plan. And I love it. But there's one caveat. I said, you know, you haven't done like 1,000 hits on Lou Dobbs to explain to you this. You just can't roll this out. This is so unlike anything that's ever done, you know, such a massive restructuring to really go to border adjustable taxes, these kind of value added taxes, which I think is quite strong in building manufacturing. I said, you're going to have not just the Kochs, you're going to have Walmart, all the retailers. Where do you stand in that process? He said, oh, yeah, well, we're going to start that. And I said, this is going to be a tough sell to Trump because, you know, Trump's going to look at this and say, hey, this is the kind of thing you make me Hoover, right? You don't know how this is going to turn out. And so Ryan's bill, his whole 7 years of everything he had worked on, and the reason he had even decided to take on the speakership was blown up by the Kochs. 30 days into the administration, remember, they started taking these ads out in the Midwest with Walmart and the New York Times, made it a page one story. The donors decided that that's not what they wanted. He totally flipped, and that's what took us all the first year, right, until really November and December to get this done. And that was Ryan really coming over to Trump's thinking about it. This is how we have to think about this. We're going to really do another, Arthur Laffer, Reagan type tax cut. Maybe the last squeeze out of the lemon as far as that goes. But we're going to do that. And so it's Ryan's thing was shattered, and he really came on board, I think, for more of the Trump program that Mnuchin, Gary Cohn, and Trump put together.
Is Trump changing here, or is Ryan learning? What's happening?
Well, I don't think Trump changed at all. I think Trump, from the beginning, when Trump even got a first briefing, because I thought it was very important to get him up to speed about what Ryan, because remember, this is to the core of Paul Ryan's being. This is what Paul Ryan's been in Washington, D.C. for, the budget and entitlements and deficits and really taxes and changing the tax code. This is why he's been there. And even a short briefing of a distillation of the ideas, let's say this charitably, Trump did not, we ran it up the flagpole and the president did not salute, okay? That was going to be a non-starter. But he didn't even have to make it a non-starter. The people in control of the Republican apparatus, right? People like the Kochs, right? They expressed their displeasure on this immediately. And this even shocked me more. I said, boy, you think Paul would have gone around and maybe got some buy-in. This thing was like in their own hit. There was some inner group up there, right, of kind of heritage alumni that had concocted this thing, which I actually thought was quite innovative and could have been terrific. But it's one of those things that you need to do years of preparing the battlefield. You need to be on Lou Dobbs. You need to be on Squawk Box. You need to be getting buy-in from Wall Street. You need to be getting buy-in from the big donors and the big corporations. And none of that work was done.
When you joined the campaign, give me a sense of why you joined, where's the campaign at that point, and what your strategy is.
It happened in mid-August of 16. It was a big article in the New York Times on a Saturday by Maggie Haberman, I think Alexander Burns, that really had one of these 8,000-page New York Times hit job specials on a Saturday morning that literally just eviscerated the campaign, eviscerated Paul Manafort, his leadership, really put, I think, the candidate Trump in a very bad light. And we had really been with the Trump program from very early on, not just with Session Miller side, but also at Breitbart, at Government Accountability. I had lost many friends I had made in the political movement because I was a newcomer to DC, but people I had worked with in the Tea Party and other areas, and even my partner at the time, Peter Schweitzer, guys that I felt a strong kindred with. I was like a cloven hoof devil because we thought that Trump, was the solution for the country at the time. And these people were adamantly opposed to it. In mid-August, it came to fruition that, the campaign had some issues, and some of the donors talked to me that day. I talked to the candidate. He knew some changes had to be made. And so, I went in. The one thing I did tell him, I said to 100, he was down, I think 12, 14, 16 points, depending on what poll you looked at. But I told him that night, and reinforced that at Bedminster on the afternoon of the 14th, to 100% metaphysical certitude. You will win if you get back and just start going back and preaching the populism and the economic nationalism that you have been preaching since you first came on this. If you go back to that and get off at the time he was in this back and forth with the Khan family. I said, if we drop all that stuff, you get back to the basics and compare and contrast yourself to Hillary Clinton, a true globalist. I said, you're going to win this thing. We just got to get back to basics. And it wasn't any big strategy that I had. It was quite simply here, in the upper Midwest, we know where these voters are. We know that there's many, many disaffected working class voters. We know there's many disaffected blue collar Democrats. We know there's tons of working class African Americans and Hispanics are just not buying it anymore, right? And maybe they're not prepared to vote for Donald Trump, but hey, maybe they're prepared to not vote for Hillary Clinton, which is a win. So I thought it was perfect. And all you had to do was get Trump on the road and put him on a big platform and let him get out there, and he would do it because he's a closer, and he closed. Well,
but you saw the forgotten, something that the president at the time didn't see or didn't choose to see.
President Obama, I think, if you go back, see this, it's a tale of two people. If you go back and look at Obama, the way he ran in the primaries in 2008, he's a populist. I was pretty impressed. I thought you had two populists in that campaign, Obama and Sarah Palin. I kind of figured it was Obama, Sarah Palin, until the financial crisis. People forget until I think on the Gallup poll that they were within the margin of error, maybe even up a half a point or 1 point because of Palin's populist dynamism. Obama ran as a populist. He ran as an anti-war, anti-foreign, this whole national security apparatus of both parties, right? And remember, in the campaign, in the primary, he's criticizing the Democratic Party, war machine, the Hillary Clinton of it all, right? And obviously the Republican Party, the Bush apparatus, in addition. But many of the themes that we kind of take and take up to the next level, you see not in Obama's presidency, but you certainly see it in particularly the early stages of his assault on Hillary Clinton in the primaries for the Democratic Party. So I think it was, I think these things are personified. Remember that on August 13th and 14th of 2016, the one thing I tell at the time candidate Trump, forget all the polls. They're not relevant. Okay. People are now just making up their minds. There's only two numbers that count: right track, wrong track, 2/3, 1/3. The country still thinks 2/3 we're on the wrong track. If you look below the surface, this is what I was studying with Goodell. People admired President Obama and his wife. They like him. They like him as people. Okay. But they didn't think Obama was the agent of change that they had voted for. Pat and I had made a film in 2012 called The Hope and the Change that went to around the country, to battleground states, to Democrats and independents and Republicans that had voted for Obama, but weren't going to vote for him before. They didn't like Romney, but they weren't going to vote for Obama because they didn't think he was an agent of change. So that was the key number. The second was, for the first time in American history, according to Pat's analysis, Goodell's, that of 70% of the American people believed America was in decline, right? And they thought the elites were comfortable with that, and that they were looking for a candidate that would return America to her former greatness. That is the Trump campaign, and that's all in the upper Midwest, right? It's around immigration, right? The lack of control of your borders and losing your sovereignty, and the shipping of the manufacturing jobs to China. Trump got this early on. Remember, I first started really watching him, although I'd met him in 2010 when he was thinking of running for president, which was, I thought, ill-advised. When I first started seeing him was Bossie would have him to these cattle calls. And in places like Iowa in New Hampshire, I always sit in the back and sit towards the back. I want to watch the crowd's response to the candidate. And when Trump came up, he wasn't speaking any of the vernacular of the Republican Party. Right? There's no limited government. There's no, the kind of heritage tax cut ideas. There's none of that stuff in there. This guy's coming up as a fire-breathing, he's like William Jennings Bryan. He's a fire-breathing populist and nationalist. And all the folks are like leaning into the speech. It's just not Donald Trump as celebrity. They're actually listening to, and I sit with the mainstream media, and nobody could care. They could care less. Nobody's following this guy. Nobody's listening to what he's saying in this non-political vernacular. More importantly, they're not seeing how it's hitting working class people in the solar plexus. That's when I said, hey, this guy Trump's got something, right? Not only does he actually kind of get it, he knows how to communicate it. And that's why I thought in 2016, hey, we got 88 days ago. We got plenty of time. We got to stop burning daylight and get on with it. But all you have to do is get back to your core themes. And all you have to do, we just got to get you on these big platforms. Everything's got to be big, right? And get you to Mexico, show you in commander-in-chief type situations. If we do that, we're going to win this.
Let me ask you about NFL for a second. Why does he go from the political to the cultural on some of these controversies?
That was very specific. That was one that he and I were on opposite sides. That was the Alabama primary where, I was, backing Roy Moore, and he was backing Luther Strange. I thought it was a terrible decision that people in the White House had gotten President Trump to back and establish a guy like Luther Strange, and Judge Moore, who I was no fan of. I was for the more populist candidate that finished third in the first round, and it kind of got beaten. I was for the Jeff Sessions agrarian populist. But when he finished third, Roy Moore was the repository, particularly the evangelicals, which is such an important part of the Trump base. You couldn't go about it. That specific instance is perfect Trump. It's the ether of the thing. When he goes, he's at a stadium, and it's in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm watching on TV. It's a Luther Strange rally. And he goes, Luther Strange comes out in a blue blazer, khaki pants, a blue Oxford button down, and out of place, a red MAGA hat, right? This is like a Jeb Bush clone, low energy, right? Kind of goes out there. And the whole audience, 60% of the audience is in bib overalls. They're Roy Moore guys. And so it's like they're like clapping like it's the U.S. Open tennis final in New York City. There's no energy. And Trump knows that. He tries to give the guy a shot. He shakes hand, and he says, well, look, no matter how this thing turns out, if Roy Moore wins it and the place goes crazy. So Trump's feeling his way. And the next thing you know, he mentions the Kaepernick thing. The place goes nuts. And I told somebody watching, I said, watch this. And you can tell he went back to it in the speech. Place goes nuts again. And as you know from, I think the New York Times reported, the next night on Saturday, he goes back to Minnesota. I think it was Jared and Kelly. He says, hey, I was just in Alabama, and I mentioned this thing, the Luther Strange is stiff, right? But I mentioned this Kaepernick thing, place goes crazy. And there's like, yeah, we should maybe let that stay down in Alabama. Don't mention it again. Sunday morning before the NFL's game, boom, on Twitter, disintermediating the mainstream media, he lights things up. And I think he has a feel. And remember, he is at the end of the day, what I call an old school patriot. The American flag, standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, standing for the national anthem, singing the national anthem, those kind of things mean a lot to him. And I think he took huge umbrage with the whole Kaepernick situation. But then again, he also saw that it resonated. And that weekend was I think and also shows you how he understands mass communications.
Well, and understands where the establishment is off on these things, right?
Yes,
and
where the elites and the establishment who look down on the better part of heartland America just misconstrued this. Remember, Colin Kaepernick, shouldn't be lost on anybody that Nike's. I think they just won an Emmy Award for the commercial, and he's got a huge shoe deal, and now he's criticizing the Betsy Ross flag. But with all the hurt quarterbacks in the National Football League, he's still unemployed.
So let me jump to Mueller for a second. So specifically, how did Trump beat Mueller at the end? And what I'm specifically interested in is the reports release and that news story and that news cycle.
Because there's nothing there. I mean, it's once again, and you look at MSNBC and Rachel Maddow. I mean, no offense. If the left was, they're all over Fox and the fake news of Sean Hannity and these guys. If Rachel Maddow had been a conservative and been hyping this thing like she's been hyping it on every element and everything, she'd be blown out. It's a disgrace. Look, we're in a situation, I would argue, that's like the 1930s. We're in a situation globally that has never been more perilous to not just the United States, but to our allies and to all freedom-loving people throughout the world, the industrial democracies, with China and North Korea, Iran, Turkey, Russia, on the Eurasian landmass, now Pakistan, Venezuela. We're in a real thing. And those stories never in Washington on the same day, we had Corey Lewandowski go before Nadler's committee, and which was and I'm a huge fan of Corey's, but being as polite as I can be, a total circus and just an embarrassment, right? That Congress would be doing this. At the same time, Joshua Wong and the kids from Hong Kong are testimony, and not once, I think C-SPAN 3 was there, not one group followed it. That shows you how out of sync the system is. Trump, I think, wanted, but one, he understands mass communications. Number two, it would turn out to be a nothing burger. And I think that's why, but God bless the Democrats and the media. They, even with the report, they got to double down after that. They got to bring poor Bob Mueller, who was a revered figure in this town as the FBI director, is a revered figure. Even after having this report, they got to bring him for his testimony, which I thought was very unfair to him personally. And of course, you saw what happened with that. So I think how Trump won it. First off, there was nothing there, and then Trump was able to use his mass communication skills to kind of put it in a box.
So last question is, looking to 2020, help us understand how divided we are right now.
It's as divided. The country is as divided as any time I think before the Civil War, even more than Vietnam. I also don't think that is a problem. And the reason is we're a democracy. People have different ideas of what the direction of the country should be. Some people, and I'm a big believer that modern capitalism has failed working class people, and particularly millennials. Remember, millennials, I say all the time, are nothing more than 19th century Russian serfs. They're better fed, they're better clothed, they have more access to information, right? But at the end of the day, they don't own anything, and they're not going to own anything. And part of that is because of Obama's, policies on quantitative easing and all this flooding of the zone of liquidity to bail out the hedge funds and the banks. And still, Wall Street is very, very powerful. It's powerful in the Trump administration. Nobody will really debate that. And so I think that is why the country is divided, because people have different, right now you have populist nationalism, which is about deconstruction of the administrative state. You have populist socialism, what's the state to be more involved in that. You have these cultural issues that people are very passionate about. It's one of the great things about America. Hey, we won in 16, the progressives won, and they won big in 18. And we're going to see in 20, it's only going to get nastier. Trump, not just his policies, but Trump himself triggers people, right? He particularly triggers, I think that's why 1 million people showed up at the Pink Hats on the Saturday after his inaugural. It's only gotten worse. It hasn't gotten better. 20 is going to be a very divisive, very tough fight. I think either side that wins is going to be, I don't think right now is the way I see it. You're not going to know until late in the evening of November 3rd or early in the morning of November 4th of 2020 of how this comes out. It's going to be hard fought, and it is going to be nasty. And I think people just have to be, understand that this is the way democracies are. It's not, you're not going to hug this out. You're not going to have a group hug, but it's, I think it's going to be a tough one, but I also think it's going to be quite exciting. And since Donald Trump's involved, it'll be every day will be a new episode.
Yeah, and as you say about Trump being so divisive, but Obama too. I mean, Obama, and it's a big part of this film, is that this great uniter that we sort of see over his political arc becomes the great divider as people respond to that administration and the bailout, TARP.
Well, I do think there was special circumstance. Like I say, I think you have to bifurcate Obama. I think if Obama had been the populist that he ran on in the primaries, defeated Hillary Clinton, you'd have a very different outcome. Remember, Obama is just like Trump didn't cause North Korea, Afghanistan, China, or Venezuela. This was all dumped on him by all the geniuses, right? Obama didn't cause the financial collapse, the worst we've had. That financial collapse where the Secretary of Treasury and the head of the Federal Reserve walk into Bush's office, say, hey, we need at 10 o'clock in the morning, say, hey, we need $1 trillion in cash by 5 o'clock, or the financial system of the United States is going to collapse. Something the Nazis, the fascists, the communists, the military junta in Japan, nobody could do, we did to ourselves, right? So I think he then reverted to not being a finance guy. Geithner and the establishment, the Wall Street clique that essentially runs the Democratic Party that never gave it up, nurtured him to a solution. His solution was to bail out the guys that caused it, right? That's what made him a divisive figure. It just wasn't culturally. The whole Tea Party is a natural look. Every time you have financial collapse, you always have a populist reaction. It's like night follows day. That's what I knew early on. I wasn't involved in politics. I knew with that financial collapse, the Tea Party, boom, starts. I said, that's it right there. That would never have come up if Obama had stuck to his populism. Remember, Obama became, look, the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve on the day in Bush's, the meltdown was $880 billion. When Donald Trump, 9 years later, takes the oath out, it's $4.5 trillion. That essentially all came on Obama's watch. That is the reason we have all the inequality, all the disparity, everything that not just Bernie Sanders, but particularly Elizabeth Warren is running on right now, is a reaction to that. And that's what I think you're seeing now. Everybody's saying, hey, well, you're not hugging up on Obama, you're not loving up on Obama in these primaries, the Democratic Party. It's just like why Trump won, the right track, wrong track. People admire and like President Obama, right? And admire and like his wife, right? But they don't think he was an agent of change. And here's why. He was not an agent of change. He exacerbated what the problems were. Now, part of that was, He's not a finance guy. He's not a business guy. He's a constitutional professor. You're in a crisis, and this is a true crisis. Okay, people like Bernanke or people and Hank Paulson are not people who panic. Said, "Oh, if we don't solve this like today, the American financial system is going to collapse." This is what they told Bush. It's going to collapse in 72 hours. The world financial system is going to collapse a week later, and you're going to have global anarchy and chaos. Oh, and guess what? Goldman Sachs and General Electric their lawyers are in conference rooms right now drawing up the bankruptcy documents. You're going to wipe out every pension fund, everything. So you can understand contextually how you have to feel your way through it. But Obama was divisive because he's not a populist. Obama ran as a populist and then flipped, and he governed as an establishment figure. That underlying tension and what we see today, let's leave the cultural issues aside. The division is between populist nationalism and populist socialism, right? What is the ultimate solution? But at least the one thing I do like about it, because there's an awful lot Elizabeth Warren says I like, right? Because quite frankly, she's taken it from Donald Trump's playbook. That at least we're now back to how do citizens get a fair shake, right? How do we stop taking care of the elites in this country, and how's the middle class? I mean, essentially, what they're saying on the left, particularly about the budget, except this thing called modern monetary theory, is just, hey, we had quantitative easing for the elites to bail them out. How about a quantitative easing for the little guy? And so that's why I think, even though we're still divided, right, and culturally we're divided, because Trump's, I think, trying to put through a system of solutions that Obama was divisive for the simple reason is he gave up on all his populist, and particularly on the war stuff. He gave up all his populist tendencies and basically became, Barack Obama is a very establishment figure.